Welcome in to the Late Night Gamecock Show. I am your host, Matt Anderson. And joining me, as always, is Alex Jones of BigSpur.com. Alex, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great. It's good to be back with everybody. Got a lot to talk about tonight.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. And unfortunately, outside of announcements, it's a dead period in college football recruiting. I believe it started,
Monday.
yesterday.
Yesterday,
So
yeah.
we'll talk about all that here in a little bit. Alex is here to recap the official visits from this past weekend. I know that a big time was had. There were a lot of commitments in town, public commitments, I should say, on unofficial visits. The Harris brothers came, and then you had some other folks that are pretty close to becoming Gamecocks that were in town for the weekend too. So Alex will break all that down. Finally, camp's over, Alex. You feel like you can breathe?
Yeah, a little bit. I even missed one camp, I think, but was a whole lot, especially those right towards the end, those 7-on-7 camps. Like, it was a loaded schedule. And you were there for that one where, they had so many teams that they had to move into the stadium as well. So a whole lot of fun, a whole lot of prospects for, the 2026 class and the future classes came through Columbia this weekend or this summer camp schedule.
Well, all I know is with this heat in South Carolina right now, I know you have to be over the moon that you're not on the practice fields right now. I think they would have had to cancel it. I don't think they could have practiced in this humidity and this heat.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm not minding sitting in the air condition in my apartment these days instead of being out there. But yeah, this heat this week's been unreal, and it wasn't, it maybe wasn't as bad as it has been out there in the past few years. But it's summer in Columbia, South Carolina. It was still warm.
Yeah. that's the truth right there. All right. Well, I do want to do a couple things here with you, Alex. There are some upcoming announcements. I feel like this recruiting board's kind of taking shape. We're going to get through all of that tonight. But Alex, how about you go ahead and hit that intro?
Welcome to the Late Night Gamecock Show from Chief Sports, South Carolina. Here are your hosts, Matt Anderson and Alex Jones of TheBigSpur.com.
Well, again, welcome back to the show. I see Craig's already in here. Queen of the Cox is in here as well. Craig, great to meet you this Saturday. A lot of fun for those of you that missed it. There was the third annual wing eating contest, and that was at CB18 or CB16. Anyways, I think it's CB18, and then Carolina Hospitality was out there as well. Great time. I would say it really was a family event. Everyone was very polite, everyone was very nice, and they had good food out there. The drinks weren't free; you had to get your drinks, but there were a lot of folks that you see on these shows that were out and about. Strick was there. JC was there. I was there for a little bit. Just a lot of fun. And the wing eating contest did not disappoint. Even old Mike Yuva got up there and did his best on 20 wings. Mike only got 10 down, though. 10 down. So, hey, you can't beat free smoked and grilled wings. I think that is pretty cool. But Alex, talking about this show tonight, it is a dead period that started on Monday. Just talk about the dead period, what that means. What are the dates? What are the rules? How much contact can the coaches have? All of that.
So it started yesterday. You had till Sunday to get those official visits done and any unofficial visitors in. And then starting yesterday is a dead period, which means no prospects can come on campus for visits. Coaches can't go on the road for visits, and that's going to last through the entire month of July. And I don't think the next year's recruiting calendar is out just yet, but so it's going to be, through July, which is a little bit different because normally South Carolina and a lot of teams would have their cookouts type of things at the end of July. And that was normally a big thing, but now it's a little bit different where, the whole month is going to be a dead period. So, coaches can still, text and stuff like that with recruits, but just no visits either on campus or off campus.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but I seem to remember at one point coaches could not initiate phone calls, but they could answer phone calls from recruits. I don't know if that's still in play or not.
I need to check to see if that's still the case.
Yeah, because with Lane Kiffin was the greatest at this. I mean, find a way to get around a rule, and Lane Kiffin will. They had to start saying no social media because he would just DM these kids and be talking to them, having conversations. Yo, call me, and then the kids would call. They'd be able to talk, and there's all kinds of loopholes. There's all kinds of ways that they can get around it. I mean, it's just the coaches. So support staff can maybe see some people, just, oh, I bumped into you type deal. But yeah, it's crazy because a lot of these kids have announcements towards the end of this month into July and even August. And I'm sure Alex knows a couple of those dates offhand, but we're not going to hold his feet to the fire there. But it's kind of a time for the coaches to breathe, I think, because especially with 7-on-7s, official visits, I mean, it's been 100% recruiting. And with the other, whatever percent they got left in their bodies, it's, pushing the street staff, watching film, analyzing the players, figuring out what roles are going to be when fall camp starts. So it's interesting, Alex, what do recruits say about this dead period? Do they like it?
I think it probably is good for everybody. As you mentioned, the coaches kind of starting with that spring evaluation period where they're on the road, kind of seeing some guys going to different, big, 7-on-7 camps or whatever it is. And then you hit into that first official visit weekend, that May 30th weekend, and it's on from there. It's recruiting every day. You got, weekend official visitors, and some schools bring in midweek official visitors, and you got, your normal high school camps, your 7-on-7 O-line, D-line camps. It's an everyday thing throughout, especially the month of June. And so now I think it's a little bit of time to relax. Obviously, there's still going to be recruiting and all that. But, what's kind of funny is, we talk about how it's a dead period, but, for South Carolina's chances and, some of the scheduled commits, it's still going to be pretty active. A lot of these guys who are coming off these official visits, a lot of them say, want to kind of get through these visits and, take the next weeks or a few weeks or so to decide. And we'll kind of jump into which guys kind of have that mindset. But, July is a very big, commitment season, for, not only South Carolina, but a lot of schools. But a lot of guys South Carolina are after right now. It could be, a lot, could see some commitments happen in July.
Yeah, I love July. Like Alex said before, with the way the calendar changed, July was, there was always 4th of July commitments. There were always 5th of July commitments. There were always mama's birthdays in July or grandparents' birthdays or their birthdays. And for the most part, I feel like a lot of these kids that commit this early, not like the kids that commit 2 years in advance. I'm not saying that. But the kids that do commit in the summertime, they want to get this decision off of their plate. They want to focus on their high school football season. For a lot of these kids, it's their last year playing high school football with their friends. And look, it's kind of difficult for a lot of these kids to take a lot of visits during the season. You think about kids up north, sometimes they have games on Saturdays and then games end at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, get in the car and drive 6-7 hours. So getting these kids in the boat early and then getting them on your campus for games is huge. So watch the fallout from all these official visits. We're going to talk about a lot of these players in depth here when we kind of set up the board for what Gamecock fans should expect for recruiting going forward. But before we do that, Alex, I just want to hear some summer camp fallout. Who were some of the best players you saw? What kids earned offers? A lot of time camp is about the younger kids. Yeah. So I do want to hear about some of these 2027, 2028s, and just, I'll let you run with it.
Well, I think one of the best players I saw, and you saw him too, was Josh Dobson from Catawba Ridge. And he was there with his teammates for that 7-on-7. And I know you were kind of over there even closer to some of that one game that we saw. He showed why he's a 5-star in that game. There was a few plays that we talked about, some showed off his closing speed on plays, kind of getting back and knocking the ball away. He was really, really good. And, there were a whole lot of other players that came through. You had, some of the PPI recruits who it's like an overseas kind of thing. Same thing that Justin Okawankro signed with Alabama out of. They had a bunch of guys come through. I think when I think back, the first player that I saw that just really stood out, and maybe one of the top guys I saw was Josh Dobson. He just showed it all. You can see why he's going to be, right now he's the top corner in the country. When you look at some of the rankings, you can see why. He was so good, and I know you got to see him up close as well.
Yeah, he was good. The Segura kid from Burns, I think he's been someone we've had our eyes on for a while. I'm trying to think even just seeing Bear Woods, just seeing how much he's grown physically, just lengthwise. He's got to grow into his body, but interesting. You never know. He's a left-handed guy, and maybe with Aaron Oland, lefty will be something.
Aiden Gibson, you mentioned Trey Segari. You're right. He looked pretty good too. Like, he's always physically looked the part, but in 7-on-7 camps, the one thing you get to see the running backs do, and really the only thing you get to see running backs do, is catch the ball out of the backfield. And he looked really natural doing it. It was natural hands, soft hands, and he could catch it and go. So I was pretty impressed with what I saw from him when Burns was in town. But then Aiden Gibson too is the other 2027 running back with an offer, and he looks the part too. It's going to be one that obviously he already has the offer, and going to be interesting to keep on watching him because I think he's got a chance to be really good. And the state's kind of been maybe a little bit down from a running back standpoint here recently, but you get into this 2027 class, you got a few really good backs, and throw in Trenton Lynch in there from Spartanburg. South Carolina has an offer there, but he's another one that's going to be one to watch as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Any O-line, D-line that caught your eyes? And talk about the kids that came over from overseas. How did they look physically? Was the game slow for them, fast for them? What did they look like? Because I've never seen international kids come through.
Yeah, I mean, they look the part. Like, and they go, they really come over, and then they go through all the different camps. And there's one defensive lineman that I'm completely forgetting the name of that I need to look up when we get a break. That was one of the guys that really stood out. And there was a few that I mentioned that Justin Okoronkwo was one that always looked the part physically when he came through, and you saw it when he went to Alabama. He's ready to go. And a lot of those guys look like they're ready to go from a physical standpoint in college. So we'll see kind of what those guys do in those recruiting process, just because it can be a little bit different from an official visit standpoint when they're coming from a Sweden or somebody like somewhere over there like that. But we'll kind of see how that continues to go.
Yeah, one of the cool things about those kids too is they play a lot of soccer. So the foot coordination, the movements, they usually are not just, they haven't focused on football their entire life like a lot of these kids have in the States. And we'll talk about a lot of these kids, but Alex, overall thoughts on camp. How do you think the talent stacked up in years past to this year, and the interaction with coaches, players, all that?
Yeah, I think it went, maybe one of the best ones they've had just kind of from since I've been covering the camps for about 3 years now. And, what was really interesting, I kind of mentioned it off the top, was you had your 7-on-7 camps early on, and they kind of ran on normal schedule, but they got to where in those last two 7-on-7 camps, that Thursday and Friday before this last official visit weekend, they had so many teams coming in to Columbia for those 2 days that, normally, as Matt, how they set up, they normally do the O-line, D-line camp over in the stadium. Had to move those guys over into Gamecock Park to kind of work out there because they had so many teams from the 7-on-7 that they had to fill into the stadium as well. So it was, just really interesting because you see, there's a lot of interest to come, work out at South Carolina. And, some of those in-state teams that came in in those late periods as well. Dutch Fork looked really good. Obviously, they got Mike Furry's son, Stone Furry, who looked really good working out there. And they got some linemen too, like Jaden Worth, who's a guy that is going to keep an eye on. Obviously, everybody is going to be watching Dutch Fork just because they're typically one of the top teams in the state, and then South Point was in late there too as well, which is Xavier Currents and all of those guys. So I thought it was one of the best I guess summer camp schedules that they've had, just because it seemed like there was a lot of interest coming work out in front of those South Carolina coaches.
Well, I got to get an update. How did my South Lawrence Bruins look? I know that you saved the best for last. They came in the last camp session. I missed it. How'd they look?
I think that, they look pretty good. I think they made the playoffs in that last segment. I can't remember how far they went because, that last playoffs, it was really kind of loaded. And then, then you had, some of the official visitors starting to come in. You had Landon Duckworth, the unofficial visitor. Obviously, everybody knows who he is coming in. And so it's kind of keeping an eye on them. But then, watching in that playoff, really, that was another loaded 7-on-7 because obviously, as you mentioned, you had South Point there. And, they played against West Charlotte in the championship. And they came down to the last play, and West Charlotte had a last-second touchdown to win that, final 7-on-7. So, South Florence, they went up against a lot of good teams that day. Well,
South Florence, as Coach Marlowe will tell you, they're never going to pass the eye test and look flashy at these 7-on-7 camps. But, hey, 2 out of the last 3 state championships, played for all 3 of them. South Florence is getting – a lot of their kids are getting offers right now, too. I follow them on Facebook, and I share every one. So, go Bruins. Beat the Knights, beat the Tigers, and get back to state. Looking forward to that. Alex, I was going to hit a quick break, but let's just go ahead and roll through the break, and we'll hit the break after this segment. Okay. Let's just talk about the official visits this weekend. I know everyone's anxious and wants to hear about it. So who was on campus that you can confirm for official visits this past weekend?
Yeah, so 9 recruits ended up being on campus, and I'll just run through the list real quick, and then we can dive into. We can go through each one. So you had 5-star offensive lineman Darius Gray, who's in out of Richmond, Virginia. Guy that South Carolina's been after for a while. Samari Matthews, cornerback from Huff. Obviously, he and Jasavian Currents, who's also in there really close. Samorian Wingo, wide receiver, 4-star out of St. Augustine. Then you had another in-state wide receiver in Sequel Patterson, who was, I think, maybe publicly a little bit of a late ad just because I think it was on Friday or maybe Thursday that it was announced that he was coming in. Same for Jamel House, too, who, that was one I actually should have mentioned when we were talking about camp standouts. Real quick on him, he was one that, when you saw him, you maybe, kind of they offered him and he maybe looked a little bit small for the tight end spot, but then all of a sudden, he's up to 6'3", 238 pounds. And when Newberry was in and I watched him, he looked really, really good. And from a physical standpoint, I know they're really excited about him. And another, the last 3 who were in were Tamarian Watkins, in-state safety that everybody, knows about out of Northwestern, Desmond Green, interior offensive lineman out of Timberland, and then Tilden Riley, the tight end out of Orangeburg Prep. Those were the 9 guys that were in this weekend.
All right, well, let's start. Let's just go through the list. Who do you feel best about for South Carolina right now? And just talk about their official visit, anything you've heard, good vibes, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think you feel, really good about where you land with Sequel Patterson. South Carolina was his only official visit. And, I know, Matt, you and I are one that talk about camp standouts from what we saw last year. That guy was one of the top guys we saw at camp last year. And, when he reclassified to the 2026 class, in that 27 class, he's a top 20 player in the country. And now, 24/7 has him at number 189. But I'd be surprised if he ends up there. Like that guy, I think he's pretty close to elite. Like he's really good, and he's going to continue to rise in rankings. So I think he's one that you feel pretty good about. Tamarian Watkins is another one, the safety out of Northwestern that South Carolina's been in on for a little bit over a year now. They kind of knew about him for a while and then had him in at camp last year, offered him, and he's really kind of taken off from there. He also took official visits to Texas A&M and Georgia and Miami, and maybe Georgia is number 2 right there, but I think you feel pretty good about South Carolina for him. And kind of same thing for Tilden Riley. He's another one that's kind of emerged here lately out of Orangeburg Prep. Like he came in for a junior day, and then not too long after South Carolina offered, and he started to roll in offers after South Carolina offered too. He got Vanderbilt, Virginia Tech, West Virginia. He also took officials to Vanderbilt and Virginia Tech, but right now, those are 3 that I feel pretty good about for South Carolina's chances.
All right, and then we're going to talk about Darius Gray. I think he had a pretty good official visit from everything I've been told. I think he feels very, very comfortable at South Carolina, but he has who's who of colleges after him. He's pretty much down to 5, and they're all elite programs. And we'll see where he ends up. I know that NIL is a factor. It's not the biggest factor, and South Carolina's competitive there. Samarian Wingo, I know that he was having a lot of fun at 7-on-7, and I can only imagine the fun kept going. He was kind of a wild card to me. It seemed like Miami, Florida were trending, but do you think the Gamecocks made a move there at all?
So I kind of felt the same way coming in, that it could be hard to pull him out of state. And, ultimately it still could be end up hard to pull him out of state. Like I think you see a top 3 of being in Florida, Miami, and South Carolina. And, I think, South Carolina, it was a really impressive, South Carolina official really impressed them. And I think they made a move like, maybe they're more in it, than people think, but I also could think that, Florida's been recruiting really well. And, a lot of times you see those, in-state Florida guys like to go to one of those in-state schools. So, I think it was a good visit for him overall. And we'll see kind of here in these next few weeks how much of an impact it did make. And just kind of real quick, we had a little recruiting news coming in. PJ Dean's going to be announcing on June 30th between Georgia, Ohio State, and South Carolina. So that will be, I think, next Monday. So that was just announced.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that. Desmond Green, I did get to see him in person. He was at the wing eating contest. Blake Franks was his official visit host, and AJ Holloway was also there for the wing eating contest. It looked like Desmond Green was having a good time. That guy is big as a house. He looks like an offensive lineman. He did win the wing eating contest. He ate the 20 wings the fastest. I know at one point South Carolina was in a really good spot for him. I think they were trailing coming into the official visit. I don't know if it was enough to get him over the hump, but what did you hear about Desmond Green there, Alex?
Yeah, as we sit here 2 days before he's announcing on Thursday, I still lean Florida for him. I think they still have their momentum here. And, it was a good visit for him to South Carolina, the official visit, but I think, Florida had a lead there going into the visit. And, as we sit here on Tuesday night, I would still lean Florida for him.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I talk about this a lot. And by the way, we had some kids that were committed take their official visits as well, right? Like Jamel House was on official visit.
Yeah. Jazavian Currents.
Yeah, Jazavian Currents. I just want to make sure we hit all 9 of them. I think we did, or if we missed one, y'all let us know in the chat box. I'm sure we'll talk about that player here in a little bit. But just remember, when these kids come on official visits, this is a different day and age. It's not the day and age of going to go to college for 3 to 5 years, the same college. If I transfer, I'm sitting out a year. Like that's everyone knows it's not the case anymore. So making sure they had a good official visit is one of the reasons the Rocket Sanders, when it came time for him to transfer from Arkansas, decided to come to South Carolina. And that was a Florida kid who South Carolina was in the driver's seat for a while. And probably, I think with Rocket, at least, I think South Carolina was his favorite, but he just saw more playing time and opportunity at Arkansas than he did at South Carolina. But those things come back around. So remember that when these kids commit to South Carolina or elsewhere, just remember that the worst thing in the world is to see the negativity that just sprawls out of this.
And to that point, I mean, think as you mentioned with some of the transfers, like a lot of times you see a school that finished second in their high school recruitment, like they're the ones that ultimately get them in the transfer portal as well. I think you could sit here and go through all the transfer portal prospects and name that. So I think that's why you see, a lot of times, schools will just continue to stay after it just because you want to keep those relationships now in the days of the transfer portal and how, kind of crazy that whole aspect of it is.
It's even crazier in basketball. I mean, I know this for a fact that some coaches want to get rid of the post-game handshake because they don't want other coaches interacting at all with their kids even after games. The running joke was that Trace and Eagle staff was going to end up at Alabama because he put a 40-year spot on him, and Nate Oates is walking through the line, and he had a little bit longer conversation than he probably needed to. Instead of saying good game, really gave it to us. It seemed a little bit more. They wondered what was in his hand for that handshake as well. But anyway, Trace and Eagle staff, Gamecock fans familiar with them. He's going to West Virginia, so not South Carolina, not Alabama, and not North Dakota, South Dakota State, wherever he came from. But just want to say, there are going to be official visits that happen during the season. They're going to be, like what Alex said, midweek. So South Carolina, they can I think the rule is you can have as many official visits as you want. You just got to pay for it. And I think players can take as many as they want as well. But I think you can only go to each school once or something like that for an official visit, but you can take as many as you want. So, the Big Spur is going to be all over this. Go ahead, Alex.
I was about to say that's probably a good segue into talking about Darius Gray. He's one that took a ton of official visits. Like, I'm not sure the exact number, but it was a lot, and he wrapped it up at South Carolina this weekend. So, just kind of, we'll go and move into Darius Gray. Like, I think, coming into it, like it was, an LSU and South Carolina battle. LSU maybe had a little bit of momentum, but I think South Carolina had a pretty big, weekend with them, and pulled out all the stops for that official visit. And I'm not sure I'm ready to go, one way or the other yet, but I think this one could be, I'm interested to see how long this recruitment continues to go out. And because as we mentioned earlier, a lot of these guys want to get these, decisions done before their senior season, but really interested to see where this one goes. I think South Carolina made a pretty big impact on this official visit with him.
Yeah, of the guys that visited this past weekend, I would say that South Carolina is in the top 3 for all of them. And when you're taking shots at these type of athletes and players, if you look at it, South Carolina didn't host a lot of 3-stars this season. This recruiting official visit season, I should say this summer. So you ain't going to get everybody, but you want to have your opportunity and you want to get your fair share. And I think South Carolina is going to be able to do just that. So Alex, anything before we hit a commercial break, sponsor break, and then come back and talk about the recruiting board overall?
Yeah, I think just to wrap up, from a Darius Gray standpoint, I think one of the things that, it was big getting him back in just because of all the official visits he had taken. And, South Carolina was in a really good spot for him for a long time, and they've been on him for a long, long time. Same thing with Samari Matthews, who I'm going to bring up in just a minute. But, I think it was big for South Carolina to get him back on campus to kind of maybe just remind him of, why he was so high on South Carolina to start with, and with the relationships he has with Lonnie Teasley and the rest of the coaching staff. So, really interesting to follow that one. And then, I think everybody, wants to talk about the Samari Matthews recruitment as well. And another one, same with Darius Gray. They've been recruiting for a long time out of Huff High School. And he's really close with Jazavian Currents. Obviously, you can imagine being that they're right in that same area with Samari Matthews in Charlotte and Jazavian Currents and Rock Hill. So one that, you're seeing some picks come in for Texas, and I'm not sure I'm ready to go that far yet. Like I think it's a South Carolina Texas battle, and this one he's got a commitment date already moved it up already. So it's going to be really interesting to see this one. I think maybe it's not over yet either going into the commitment date, but South Carolina, I think with all these official visits, obviously everybody has good visits, good official visits, but I think that's one where they were able to get him back in after having gone through his whole schedule was good for South Carolina.
I will say Samari Matthews is a Malik Clark type kid to me. I think all things equal distance to every school, equal NIL, equal playing time, his heart's in South Carolina. Now, does that ultimately come to bear? We'll have to see. I know winning matters to him. It's not all about NIL. I think he's gotten a bad rap for that. Where he goes, he wants to win and he wants to be developed. And look, TG, Torian Gray, he has a fantastic relationship with that kid.
Yeah,
and
that was
that
was going to be what I was going to bring up. Yeah, like that goes back to how long they've been recruiting him. Like Torian Gray and Samari Matthews have built a really strong relationship, and I think if you're South Carolina, that's just one of the things that you hope helps you win out in the recruitment. Just because it's same with as I mentioned with Darius Gray, they've been recruiting Samari Matthews for a long time. It's made him a priority for a long time.
And Torian Gray has the track record and the receipts, and for me, I think if you're an elite corner, elite safety, South Carolina has to be in your top 3. Well, I don't care where you're from.
And to your point, like, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. Like when you talk to these defensive back recruits who South Carolina are going after, like I feel like every one of them mentioned like Torian Gray's track record, not only at South Carolina but throughout his coaching career. Like, that's something that really stands out to a lot of these guys. For all the guys at South Carolina that he's put in the NFL, but then as all his other stops at Virginia Tech, Florida, wherever it may be, like that's something that I feel like it's always brought up is his track record. Yeah,
I think so too. And before we hit this break, Maddox here. I do see you here in the chat. I want to recap some of this. I see a lot of quack, quack, quack in the chat box. That's obviously referring to Landon Duckworth, who we'll talk about here in a little bit. The Queen of the Cocks says that I need Noah Clark welcome home desperately. He would be a big one. Maddox, you ask final recruiting ranking in your opinion. We'll talk about that in the next segment. And then lastly, I think that if you read through the tea leaves, if you watch Inside the Gamecocks, if you watch our show, if you watch you listen to Coffee, you're plugged into the Chief Sports Network and the BigSpur.com. You can kind of read the tea leaves, but just a heads up, Alex and I are never gonna spoil a kid's moment. Even if we do know the welcome home, and a lot of times we do, but welcome homes usually stick. But just we're not gonna rain on a kid's moment and let them build whatever suspense they want to, and hopefully it works out well for the Gamecocks, for all the fans out there that support them. So, yeah, you can kind of read between the lines, Maddox, and we're going to go through this entire recruiting board breakdown when we get back. So, Alex, go ahead and hit that sponsor break, and I hope you guys have had your dinner. Otherwise, you're going to
Mike here for one of the better dining options in the capital city. When I first moved there, I asked people around the radio station, where are the best wings? Well, the consensus was D's Wings. That was then. Today, they still have the best wings, but it's so much more now in their new location at 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia. Yeah, they get voted the best wings on a routine basis. Yes, they get voted the best sports bar on a routine basis, but they're not just about wings, and really, they're not just a sports bar. It is a family-run local restaurant and bar with 20 TVs and 25 beers on tap. And how about these daily specials? Every Monday night at D's, you've got 75-cent wings from 4 until closing. Tacos on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, 18 wings and a pitcher of beer for $29. You've also got ribs and oyster bucket specials on Thursday. And no matter how big the party is, 20 or more, no problem. Just call ahead of time and they'll take terrific care of you. They'll do takeout as well. And guess what? A human will answer the phone and take the order. Billy and his staff do an outstanding job. Check out D's, 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia.
Welcome back, y'all. And just really quick on my last comment. You guys can talk about all you want in the chat box. Throw out names, talk amongst yourselves. If you want to break news and you have it, break it. By all means, we're all here for that. But I will say, Beamer what's the right word? He throws out some clues. when he does his welcome home tweets. Normally, if there's a South Carolina flag in it, it's a South Carolina kid. Normally, there's a hashtag for the year. You know which recruiting class it's in, and there isn't a hashtag and there isn't a South Carolina state flag. It's probably an out-of-state kid that's not in the next class because they don't have their hashtags lined up for 27, 28, 29, 30. Although I guess that they should be getting those ready because kids are committing earlier and earlier. But talking about recruiting, Alex, I think this is the perfect time to just breathe, reset, and let's look at this recruiting board. So right now, Alex, I have the recruiting board at 31 players. I did shoot this to you a little bit earlier, so if you want to add anybody, go ahead. But I have it narrowed down to about 31 players in my mind, and there's only 8 that are on the commitment list right now. So start paying attention to these announcements, these commitment dates, the fallout from it. And then I guarantee you there are going to be 8 to 10 guys that come on the radar, maybe more, that come on the radar throughout their senior season, throughout all-star games, throughout decommitments around the country. This is a game of chess that the coaches have to figure out, and they got to hold scholarships in case something happens. They gotta really manage this. So I feel really good about the 8 that the Gamecocks have right now. I think that they're all really good players. Some of them are probably underrated, in my opinion. I wouldn't say any of them are overrated, but I do really like the offensive line class. I think that the defensive back class is good so far. The linebacker is fitting needs, but we'll go through position by position, Alex. So we'll start at the most important position on the field, quarterback. Right now, I think that Landon Duckworth is the guy until he makes his decision that they're not going to move on anybody else. And I think that South Carolina is the leader in the clubhouse. Thoughts there, Alex?
Yeah, I agree. Still feeling pretty good about South Carolina's chances there. And, I thought it was pretty big for South Carolina to be able to get him in this past weekend for an official visit. Not only to get there on Friday, but he stayed through Sunday, I think mid Sunday afternoon. So he was around all weekend. And to add to that, I think it was even, a better sign for South Carolina just because he had been in Los Angeles, the whole week before that, being at the Elite 11. And, that's a cross-country trip to come back to, Columbia, South Carolina when you're passing by or flying back by, Alabama in your home. So I think that was a pretty good sign for South Carolina. And, as far as a commitment date, he said the Elite 11, I think he wants to decide sometime in, July. And, we'll see, if that, if he moves that up or, what happens there. But so regardless, still feeling pretty good about South Carolina's chances there going up against Auburn.
Yeah, and I think so too. I feel pretty confident about Landon Duckworth. Nothing's ever in stone, and nothing's ever in stone until there's NIL, whatever when NLI or the fax is in, all that kind of stuff. So no matter who's committed right now, but feel good about him. Running back is just a mystery to me, Alex, and I didn't realize this that South Carolina hasn't had an in-state running back since like 2014 in their class. I think Hale brought that up recently. But look, the 2 kids that we talked the most about in Gamecock circles are committed to other programs. And that's Carson Baker, who the Gamecocks really liked, who's committed to, I believe, Georgia, right? And then Amari Thomas. What's that?
Florida.
Yeah, Carson Baker's committed to Florida. And then Amari Thomas is committed to Florida State. Amari Thomas did come in for an official visit. Wore Gamecock gloves at an FSU camp. I don't know if Carson didn't make him for an official, but he did. He has been on campus before. Thoughts on running back, and are they going to take one? Where are they going to go?
Yeah, I think, obviously Carson was, for a long time, Carson Baker was kind of their top guy there, I think. And he ended up going to Florida, committed to Florida kind of the week before he was supposed to come into South Carolina for an official visit. And, I think South Carolina finished probably second for him in that recruitment. Like, he was kind of canceling a lot of official visits, but before he committed to Florida, he was still on to officially visit South Carolina. So just continue to watch that one. We'll see. I haven't, heard anything, as far as South Carolina's interest there. Like, I think they'll probably imagine you have to stay on him just because of how much of a priority they made him. And with Amari Thomas as well, like, I think, South Carolina was in a pretty good spot. And, he went to Florida State for that official visit the last week. And, I think we all kind of talked about, you have to kind of see if you can survive that, you continue to keep your momentum there. And, I think that could be one that just even goes into the season as well. Just continue to watch that one and all the way up to maybe even a sign-in day. And, as far as other those two guys, there's nobody out there right now. Like maybe somebody pops up on the radar here, maybe during their senior season or whatnot. But those are the two guys that I'd be watching in the class for right now.
Yeah, and I think it's important to watch Florida's season this year because everyone loves DJ Lagway, but let's not forget that Napier was on the hot seat going into last season and had a kind of a surprise year with a really tough schedule. So let's see if Billy Napier can capitalize on that. Wide receiver, we've already talked about a couple of these names here, Alex, but I have Sequel Patterson, Samarian Wingo, Travis Johnson, Brody Keefe is kind of popping up again. Are those the names that you kind of are looking at right now, or is anybody else I should think about?
Yeah, I think those are the names to kind of watch. And, I think we talked about South Carolina's chance and how we feel pretty good with Sequel Patterson, and what they were able to do there in that recruitment. And Travis Johnson, I think you're hearing a lot of momentum for Michigan right now in that one. And with Brody Keefe, like, has kind of been an interesting recruitment. Like, he was a really highly rated recruit a few years ago and really even into last year. And he's committed to Duke right now. And he was in with his team for 7-on-7 and saw he gets some attention from Mike Furry every now and then. And so, maybe that ends up being one to watch right now. I wouldn't say there's anything that's going on there, but, I think they're always going to keep, every, door open to see what they can find. And, I think with that wide receiver class this year, with having signed 6 in this past class, like it may have been a little bit harder this year to do 2 signed wide receivers just because of having those, 6 freshmen. And it's all about playing time for one thing. And, having those guys already signed, like, I think, if you're able, obviously you feel good about your chance with Sequel Patterson, and like maybe if you end up finding a way to get one more, or even maybe if it's just a Sequel Patterson, I think you still feel good about where that room is overall.
Yeah, I agree. At tight end, you already have Jamel House, who's committed, and then Tilden Riley has an announcement date coming up, or he's talking about announcing soon. We just want to sit down with his family. I think he did say it might be in a couple of weeks, I think. South Carolina kid, South Carolina offered. You already said everything about him. Do you think the Gamecocks are willing to take 2 tight ends in this class, right, Alex?
Yeah, I think so. And, I think 2 is kind of their number there. I think with Tilden Riley, as I mentioned with him earlier, they've been recruiting him for a long, long time. And, I think with him, he kind of said this weekend after the official visit, like it'll probably be this week from a decision standpoint. And, we'll see, kind of keep an eye on that one. But, I still like South Carolina's chances there with Tilden Riley. And I can see it, if they end up landing him and already having House in the class, I think that could be their tight end class for the year.
Yeah, and just a reminder on House, the coaches were very excited to get his commitment during the season last year. He is a really, really good-looking prospect.
Yeah.
Offensive line, Zion Giles, Anthony Baxter already committed. Then you got the guys that are kind of up in the air. I'll run through them real quick. Darius Gray, we've talked about. Desmond Green, we've talked about. You have JB Shabazz, who Carolina felt pretty good about. He had a really good official visit. Seems like something's fading there. I don't know if it's interest on his end or the Gamecocks end. Then Kamari Blair. I thought Kamari Blair might commit on his official visit and ended up holding off. So, what are you thinking on the offensive line and overall numbers there?
Yeah, I agree with what you said on both of those guys. I with Shabazz and Blair. Like it seemed like it could have been pretty close, a few weeks ago, and I think maybe it's starting to fade a little bit. And that's we talked about with a lot of these guys, like especially the guys that came in early. Like the momentum that you built with these guys, you had to find a way to sustain it when they go on these other visits to if you're Shabazz, if they go to Tennessee, or Blair went to Tennessee as well, and Shabazz went to Ohio State. So. I think, watch Tennessee with Blair and, Shabazz, we'll see. But from an offensive line standpoint, I think, and then we mentioned Desmond Green as well. Like maybe, he's committed in 2 days. I think, a lot of momentum for Florida right there with him. So, and then, still got Darius Gray on the board as well, and I think obviously that's South Carolina's top target there. And then we'll see kind of there's always guys that sometimes pop up as well for a class, and we'll see what else can happen.
Yeah, Trey Aiken, he was scheduled for an official visit, didn't make it in. I don't think he's going to be a part of the class right now, but I wouldn't tell you're crazy if the coaches decide to circle back around. But I think he's probably going elsewhere as things stand right now. At Maddox, I do want to give you a shout out here. Percentage chance we land Gray. Alex, I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there, and you tell me higher or lower. Okay, I'm going 50%. I really think I think it is down to South Carolina and LSU. So logically, you can say 50%. I think that it's a heart of like 60%, 70% to go to South Carolina. And then it's just weighing out where he thinks he's going to get coached up the best. And LSU's offensive line coach has a deeper track record than Lonnie Teasley right now.
Yeah, and Tennessee as well. Keep an eye on Tennessee here. Like I can see it being a South Carolina, Tennessee, LSU type of thing. As far as the 50%, like you put me right on the spot with the 50%. Like I'd go a little bit higher right now. I think it just comes down to, the South Carolina's relationships and the stronger, longer type of theory went out here for South Carolina. That's something that I think we still just kind of want to figure out more on moving forward. But right now, I think I'd go a little bit higher than 50% on South Carolina's chances.
Okay. Defensive end, I'm not going to break it down to edge, defensive end, all that kind of stuff, blind side, short, whatever, strong side. So Zion Giles, Carter, Gamecocks don't have anybody committed right now at defensive end. So you're looking at Carter Meadows. I think he said that he's going to try and announce in the next 3 to 4 weeks. He's another guy that Gamecocks got on campus. Had a really good visit. What's the staying power there? Thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, with Meadows, I think it was always, can you get him, he had the 3 Big Ten schools on his list, and I think you always had to watch the Penn State, you always had to watch the Michigans, and he and Julian Walker, who I was going to talk about next, so they're in Michigan together this weekend for an official visit, and it's hard to doubt Sterling Lucas. He's won these battles before, and we'll see. South Carolina had that first official visit with him, and we'll see if they've done enough and if they're able to battle off some of those other Big Ten schools up in that area. And with Julian Walker, still feel pretty good about their chances. Obviously, with the connections to the staff he has with his dad being on the string staff, Jameel Walker, and still feel pretty good about South Carolina's chances. And he's a really good player as well. And so that's kind of one to watch there. And then I think I know you got on your list the Henriks guy from Sweden, and he's one that we talk about those guys that could be in for there's always guys that be in for summer official visits or the season official visits, and maybe he's one that comes in for a season in-season official visit. That's one that it could. I haven't heard anything if that could happen, but that could be one of the names to watch just because of how late they offered, being that it was in the summer and then the whole circumstances of living in Sweden. So he was a really good player. He was another one I could have mentioned earlier from what the camp standouts. He was one that really caught everybody's attention that day at camp and earned the offer. So kind of interested to see how that board continues to fill out. But, I think I feel pretty good right now with Julian Walker and the chances they have with him.
Yeah, I think it's never a bad thing when there's a guy going on an official visit to another school that you feel good about and you have the opportunity to form a bond and potentially want to play together. I'm going to throw out the name that we don't talk about, Alex. We don't talk about Bruno. We don't talk about Zion Ely, but he is a kid that came through with his recruiting tour. If you're on the Big Spur, Hale has said, if anything happens with him, it's going to be very, very quiet. It's probably not going to be a thing you're going to hear about until someone's on campus. But I think he is more open than, maybe he says publicly. Now, does that mean South Carolina is 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th in line for his services behind Maryland? I don't know, but I think that recruitment is going to have some wacky turns in it.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting follow. Just, Maryland's, as you can imagine, is going all out to keep him in their class. And, he's, obviously he was down for the one camp with this whole team. He was on the bus tour with his teammates and was down. And he also took an official visit to Auburn way kind of earlier in the process. And, he said that, he, shut down his recruitment. And, but it could be one just to keep an eye on just as the season rolls along to see how everybody's season is going.
Yeah, I think with Zion Ely, it's going to be you will see him on a college campus for a football game at some point this season that is not Maryland's home field. Now, is that South Carolina? I don't know. But moving on, defensive tackle, you have Aiden Harris committed. Then you got Noah Clark, PJ Dean. They have announced commitments soon. I feel good about both of them, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is Travian Robertson's, showing his worth, not only as a, X's and O's coach, but I knew when Travian got some relationships built and some tenure at South Carolina was going to be good. And it looks like he's in a strong position to land both of them.
Yeah. So Dean, we'll start with him. He was one that, was in for that early official visit weekend. And, South Carolina made a really big impact with him. And, I think we all kind of talked about was, can South Carolina get over the hump with the Georgia connections with his brother being at Georgia or just being at Georgia playing football and now going off to the NFL? Like, could they get over the hump for those things? And, I don't think Ohio State's really in this one. Like, I think it's going to come down to South Carolina, Georgia. And I agree. Like, right now, I feel pretty good about South Carolina's chances. And, what was kind of, I think boosted those chances, in my opinion, was when he came to a camp just kind of out of nowhere on that, I think it was Thursday, decided to come and camp at South Carolina when there wasn't, his teammates weren't there or anything like that. I think that was a pretty big sign for South Carolina. And, as I said earlier in the show, he announced just a little while ago that he's going to commit on June 30th. So, I think I agree with you there. I like South Carolina's chances. And, that same day that PJ Dean was at camp, Noah Clark's teammates were down at camp, and he didn't camp, but he came down to camp to watch camp, and I think that was another pretty good sign. And I think we've all talked about how it could come down to South Carolina, NC State for him, and he was in Raleigh this past weekend. But I really like South Carolina's chances with him as well, and I think he's got that commitment date of July 2nd. So the defensive line class could be really, really good for South Carolina this year, and Travian Robertson's done a really good job, obviously, with Aiden Harris already in the class. Then you got two really solid chances with two guys that are highly ranked as well. All from North Carolina. Too.
Well, hey, look, don't forget, Travian's from Laurinburg, North Carolina, right on the border. He is a North Carolina kid. Valden Sone, he picked up an offer at camp. The offer's fresh. They obviously like what they saw. If you're offering a kid at camp, you're willing to take a commitment right then and there. Have you heard anything leak out or heard anything behind the scenes on what their plans might be for him?
Yeah, he's another one of these guys that's with the PPI group, I'm pretty sure. And he was in that same camp as well and had a pretty good showing. And, I don't know. Like, I think you probably wanted to get him in for a summer official visit. So we'll continue to watch that one. But right now, I don't think there's anything like imminent or anything with South Carolina right now. And, I think as far as other names, like I think you kind of really just focus in on those three guys that we've already mentioned right there with already having Aiden Harris in the class and having PJ Dean and Noah Clark making decisions pretty soon. Like I think if anybody else pops up just because the numbers in that room, you see what you can do. Like obviously there was some talk about Seven Cloud way earlier in the process. The JUCO guy is committed to Georgia, and we'll see. But there's always sometimes defensive tackles that pop up on the radar sometimes during the season. So I'm interested to see if that happens again this year.
Same here. At linebacker, if you go to 24/7 Sports, Keenan Britt is listed as an edge, but he's going to play linebacker for South Carolina. And then you have Andrew Harris as well. I was told early on that South Carolina was comfortable taking just one linebacker in the class, and that was going to be Keenan Britt. And then, you have an opportunity. You don't turn down the Harris brothers. I don't know. Do you think that they're going to go on any more linebackers? I don't even see anybody on the radar at this point.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think with the amount of guys they signed in this last class last year, like I think you get Keenan Britt and Andrew Harris, and I think you feel pretty good about that room for the future just because of how young it's going to be, along with guys like a Fred Johnson who's still got years of eligibility, and Justin Okwankwo who still has multiple years of eligibility. So you find a way to finish it off with these two guys in this class. I think you feel really good about that room for the future.
Yeah, and you go to defensive back. KJ Johnson's already committed. He took an official visit, committed shortly after that. Koski Barnes he took an official visit. I think the Gamecocks really like him, and Samari Matthews, who we talked about earlier. I think the Gamecocks would love to lock down the two that aren't committed yet. We'll see if it comes to fruition. Do you have a feel on either of those guys right now as things stand, Alex?
You see a lot of talk about Koshi Barnes in South Carolina right now, and I think you see why. I got us from Grimsley High School in North Carolina. Again, another guy that South Carolina got in on here pretty early before he started to blow up, and he took a handful of official visits after South Carolina. But I think again the track record that Torian Gray has with defensive backs, and he's got a 6'3", just completely fits what they look for at cornerback. So. I think I feel pretty decent about their chances with Koshi Barnes. And, we kind of talked about Samari Matthews as one that just continue to watch it to see what happens. Like, could very much come down to South Carolina and Texas. And I don't know which way I'm quite leaning there right now. Obviously, still got a few weeks leading up to his decision. But South Carolina's definitely in this one. Is going to be going to be in it all the way to the end.
Yeah, and kind of rounding this out at safety, Jasavion Current's already in the class, actively recruiting for the Gamecocks, essentially has shut everything down, as far as I'm aware. Tamarian Watkins, in-state kid, we talked about him earlier. I like the Gamecocks' chances there. And then Joel Combe, I know that he's took an official visit. He's still in the wings. Gamecocks, I think, will take all of them.
Yeah, also we talked about how they feel pretty good about Tamarian Watkins' chances in South Carolina. And, with Combe, I think, the one thing I had was just kind of watching that Tennessee official visit. And, I think that came a little bit to fruition. I could see, it coming down to maybe a South Carolina Tennessee battle for him. He's decided on July 9th, and Tennessee kind of had the last word with him, So we'll see. I'm going to continue to watch that one. But, I think it very much going down to South Carolina Tennessee for him. And he's really good. And another guy that kind of fits what they look for at that safety spot. And if you end up getting, Jasavion Currents is already committed, Tamarian Watkins ends up committing to South Carolina. And I think anything else you can get on top of that, it's just kind of icing on the cake.
Yeah, and I'm not tracking any punters or kickers this class. I wouldn't be surprised to see them, kick the tires on some kids maybe in the transfer portal or, some preferred walk-ons, that type of deal. Because ideally, I don't think it matters that much, but, coaches will say ideally you don't want the same guy punting and kicking field goals and kicking and doing kickoffs, wear and tear on a leg. But my God, either you're scoring a lot of points and that's not a bad thing, or you're punting too much and that is a bad thing. So, hopefully, I think Mason loves Prime to do both. We've already talked about that on this show. So look, that's 31 guys that we just ran through. And that's pretty much the board, give or take some. I think if Carolina lands 70% of those kids, you're talking about landing 21. So 13 of the uncommitted prospects we talked about, that's a heck of a class. Of a class.
A lot of those guys we talked about that we said, that we both feel pretty good about their chances are, 4-star guys. You obviously got the 5 stars in there with Darius Gray and Samari Matthews. And Landon Duckworth's a guy that, we talked about his chances, but just from a, on the field standpoint, had a really good Elite 11 camp. And he's, number 50 overall, I think, by 24/7 Sports. And wouldn't be surprised if he keeps rising in the rankings. And, if South Carolina ends up getting his commitment, and the more he rises to the rankings, the more that does from a team ranking standpoint, which isn't the end all be all. But, as you kind of mentioned, this class, if they're able to kind of close on some of these guys here down the stretch in July and, moving forward, and then see what you can do from a flip standpoint or whatever, once the season gets underway, it could be a really, really good class.
Yeah. Let's not forget the offensive tackle that was committed to Georgia Tech, who flipped on National Signing Day, a 4-star kid, kind of came out of nowhere. So you just never know how these kids talk, who gets uncovered, who the coaches are talking to. You still got the Shrine Bowl. You got a lot of opportunity for these kids to rise. So, the last thing I do want to touch on before we get out here, Alex, one note, someone asked at this point, can we assume that Rasul Fajan is going to be ineligible? I'll put it this way. Alex and I talked to a lot of people. We're around the program a good bit. No one's talking about it. That's all I can really tell you. Not one way or the other. Not good, not bad. It's just where we are. I know that the coaching staff feels like they've done everything that they were supposed to do. Faison feels like he's done everything he's supposed to do. He has a lawyer. I think if it comes down to it, it will get pushed, pretty hard by his attorney. It's not something that I'm going to worry about until I'm told to worry about it, and I haven't been told yet. So, Alex, your thoughts on that?
I feel the exact same way, and it's just kind of a waiting game now. I feel like we've been in a waiting game for months and months now for the NCAA and Rossville phase on. And you have to imagine that South kind of wants an answer pretty quickly, just because you want to have those plans together, in case he's ruled ineligible. You want to have everything kind of lined up for what you want to do. And obviously they already landed Colorado, the transfer of Colorado running back Isaiah Ostigave. So, I think that, that wasn't a sign of anything. That was just a case of the guy that was in the transfer portal that you could take. That's a pretty good player. Like, why not take him? And, I still feel good about, the chance that he gets ruled eligible, I think, and just kind of playing the waiting game right now.
I'm just going to tell you, like, if you're on the Big Spur, if you're on social media, if you're asking about him in this show, I promise, like, you're talking about him more than anybody else in the program is talking about his eligibility or ineligibility. It's just not talked about. And I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign, but, it's just not talked about. It's just, status quo, waiting on the paperwork. We've submitted everything on our end. So, we'll see there. But one programming note, we hope that everybody has a fantastic 4th of July. We will not have a show next week. We're going to enjoy time with our family and friends. And so we will not have a show next week. Tentatively, we are planning to come back in 2 weeks. I think the Daily Show is taking 2 weeks off starting this Friday, or starting after this Friday. But Alex and I will probably be back in 2 weeks on Wednesday. But we'll make sure we let you know on the Big Spur if anything changes. But plan to see us in July. We're going to come back, and hopefully there's a lot to talk about. Maybe baseball transfer portal has settled down. I know that the Monty Lee bat signal went out tonight, so it sounds like they landed somebody else. But, once we come back, it's SEC Media Days, it's fall practice, it's gearing up for the season, and Alex and I will have a ton of content. We'll do the same thing we did last summer. We're going to break everything down. We're going to talk about the SEC as a whole. We're going to talk about the Gamecocks. We're talking about the schedule. We're going to talk about predictions. We're going to give individual predictions, for what we expect for the team, national champion, all that kind of stuff. That's what Alex and I love doing. So can't wait to see you all in, call it 2 weeks. And Alex, have a good rest of the night. Hopefully you can get some sleep and get some rest next week. When you have a little one, rest is hard to come by. So enjoy it, my single buddy.
Yeah, I mean, whole lot of fun being here so far through this, summer camp. Obviously, June was a loaded month, and obviously get a little bit of time off in July. But I mean, the commitments and recruiting continue to roll on in July, and before we know it, football season will be here.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for being a part of the show tonight. Thank you for giving us your time. It's the most valuable thing you have. We really appreciate it. We do this for y'all, and we do it because it's a lot of fun to interact with all of you. So everyone stay safe this 4th of July. Don't shoot any fingers off. Be safe with the fireworks. If you had a little too much, maybe let the sober person shoot off the bottle rockets. We want to see you all back here in 2 weeks. So have a great one, y'all. Have a great 4th. Celebrate America, our independence, all of that. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good one, everyone. Bye.